I want to talk about a problem that can be like a real ghost, almost really a ghost in the machine to a lot of the wide web folks, and maybe even some narrow web folks who are working with films these days. I know they're making some pretty good narrow web equipment. But this pertains to thin gauge, low density polyethylene films. And I'm going to talk about pour, roll, edge, wind. Okay? You know, there's a lot of old machines out there, and even some of the new machines can get out of adjustment or don't even start off not being set correctly or something. But anyhow, you have this situation where you're running film, something like, you know, anywhere from 8/10 mil to 1 mil to 1.25 mil and up to 2 mil poly. Beyond that, usually you don't have that much of a problem. But let's say something like 1 mil poly, all right? 1 mil low density poly. And you have it running on a press, a CI press, let's say, or a stack press, it doesn't matter. And it's running through there. And by the time you bring it to the back of the machine, where you're rewinding it, you know, and you can have, let's just take one roll. You know, let's say you're rewinding the roll and you know, the material's coming like that from, you know, the rest of the machine. So you're rewinding it on the rewind here, okay? Sometimes you do your best, you adjust the web guide coming off the roll, you adjust the web guide right at the end coming onto the roll, and everything you try, but you notice that on the side, either one side or the other of the roll, and if you're slitting it down the middle, usually, and putting it on another roll up here, say, some situations where you're, you know, rewinding the material onto another roll here, and you actually don't have this there. Whether you're doing that situation, or whether you're doing the other situation that I had on there, usually the outsides of the rolls, you notice that it's like, sometimes it's too big, and sometimes it's narrow, and it's kind of rhythmic, and it's even. And as it gets out further outside the roll, it looks like the frequency increases, but that's because there's more material outside the roll, okay? And no matter what you do with the web guides, you can't figure out what's going on. Well, here's one possibility, and especially if you notice it on your light gauge films, but you don't notice this on your other films, okay? All right. Now, usually your BC dryers, your between color dryers, are not the culprit unless you really have a high degree of heat blasting out of your BC dryer. Maybe that can affect things. But what I'm going to talk about is the overhead dryer, your tunnel dryer above the press, and the rhythmic cycling of the heating of that tunnel. Okay. Now watch. Let's say, for simplicity's sake, you have a press, and here's where you're rewinding. Okay. Rewind, and over here is the CI drum or whatever. The material goes up here, over a roller, through here, comes down here. That's a simple drawing, right? All right. Now up here you have the tunnel. All right. And that up, you might have up there even the dryer itself, but somewhere in this system you have a dryer, okay? And by dryer I mean either electric or gas, but in my experience, I learned this with a gas one, okay? Now what happened? It turned out, in the case where I discovered this possibility here, that was happening to me. And I started to notice that when the material, when the roll corresponded with the material being wider onto the back of the roll, that dryer up there was blowing real high heat. and then it would reach a temperature and boom, kick off. So now we went through a cycle of cooling off. That would correspond with the material starting to get narrower and narrower and narrower. Then once again the dryer would come on, and it would create that intense heat. The material started to melt a little bit, even if you had the temperature set about 125 or 130 degrees or something like that, even or 150 or something. You would think, and that cyclic pattern started to happen. All right. So what did I do to solve it? Turned out I turned down the level of intensity that the heat applied. Okay. So rather than having a high degree of heat come out and then have to be off and go through that cycle, it was almost like the temperature barely kept up with the requirement of the tunnel. So it was on at a lower temperature for a much longer period of time, and then maybe kicked off for a little while and kicked back on, and took a long time to get too hot again. And so now, instead of having peaks where you had heat and no heat, heat and no heat, it was kind of like, and this was the center point, it was more like gradual heating, kick off and coming down like this, okay? So we reduced the peaks of heat and cool in that tunnel up there by lowering the temperature that it blasts at. Now, of course, if you do that, you have to be aware of it, because if you run materials that require higher heat, then you have to make that adjustment. But I think that in any case, it's probably better to have that balance so that you have a more continuous lower grade heat than this high-low heat situation. So if you're having that problem, you might want to look at your tunnels and see if the dryer is maybe a cause of that problem. Look and see if something like this is what's happening. All right?